Okay, so we're here. We're going to record the answer key for the 2010 August Algebra 2 and Trig Regents exam, and we're going to go through each problem. So here we go. Problem number one. Oops, sorry about that. Problem number one is the product of two binomials, one of which is a radical. All you do is FOIL. And you'll see me, I FOIL them out, 3 times 3, 3 times -5. Anyways, these two cancel off, then you just get 9 minus 5. 9 minus 5 is 4. What's the radian measure? Radian measure of an angle whose measure is -420. Here's what you do. Anytime you want to convert from degrees to radians, you multiply by pi over 180. Top times top, bottom times bottom. This is the same thing as 420 over 1. Reduce these in your calculator and just punch it in, and it simplifies down to 7 pi over 3. Okay, next example. What are the domain and range of the function shown in the graph below? Well, domain is the where it exists in the x direction, and range is where it exists in the y direction. So look, it starts out at -1, 2, 3, -4, all the way to infinity, because that's what that arrow means. So it's anything greater than or equal to -4 for the x's. And the ranges, look, 1, 2, it starts at 2 and goes up to infinity, because this thing is actually going to keep rising, although it doesn't look like it. So y's got to be greater than or equal to 2. The expression 2i squared plus 3i cubed is equivalent to, use the calc. Let me show you what I mean. So grab your calculators. Mine's been set back to like the original settings. Make sure you're in a plus bi mode. Just hit the mode button, scroll down, go over to a plus bi, hit enter. And then type this bad boy in. 2, the I button's right over here. 2i squared plus 3i cubed. Whoops. It's -2 minus 3i. That's it. Which graph is coterminal, has an angle that's coterminal with -70? Well, the negative portion, let's zoom out a little bit. -70 means we go the clockwise direction starting right here. So -70 drops me right there. And theta is coterminal with it in this diagram, because coterminal means with co, the same ending, terminal. What are the two possible values of c to the nearest tenth? So the first thing I did was literally I drew this diagram out. A was 74, little a across from it, 59.2, c is 60.3, and then it asks for like, what's the angle of c? Law of sines. Use the law of sines. So side C is to the sine of C, as side A is to the sine of A. And cross multiply, divide, you get this funny looking thing. Now, in order to find out how much C is, you have to do the sine inverse of all of this. That's what I'm doing over here. Sine inverse of all of this is, 78.3. But there are two values which give that same, which will work in the law of sines. The value that you get from the original equation, and also 180 minus that. And that's always the case with the law of sines, so be careful. So two possible values are 78.3 and 101.7. Remember, always check the supplement of the angle that you get with the law of sines. It's another possible alternative for the problem. Up, this one got scanned in. This one got scanned in upside down. Let me just reverse it around. Okay. So here we go. What's the principal value of the cos inverse of this? Just plug that in your calculator. Literally watch. Check this out. Cos, whoops. So we got to make sure what degree, what are we in? We got to put our calculator in degree mode. So cos inverse of negative square root 3 divided by 2. It enters 150. That's why you choose that one. What's the value of x in this equation? Look, you got 9 raised to 3x plus 1 and 27 raised to the x plus 2. Give these guys the same base. 9 is 3 squared. 27 is 3 cubed. Then, as I always told my students, you got to make it rain. Take this, distribute it inside to this 2. by the law of exponents. Same thing with this guy. So it's like 3 to the 6x plus 2. And, you know, then because they have the same bases, in order for these two equations to be equal, their exponential powers must be equal. So 6x plus 2 equals 3x plus 6. Solve, reduce, not reduce, you know, subtract 3x from both sides. You know, divide by 3. There you got your answer. The roots of this equation are, this is pretty freaking hard for you to factor. In fact, look what you would get if you tried factoring. So use the quadratic formula. It's easy. This quantity is A, this quantity is B, and this quantity is C, and plug it in. Remember, the quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Reduce this, 73, pick your answer. That's it. Which ratio represents the cosecant? Cosecant is the inverse of sine, which means sine is opposite over hypotenuse, so cosecant is hypotenuse over opposite. Locate angle A. Hypotenuse is 25. The opposite side is 7. Oh, we got to flip this guy back around. Okay. So here's what I did for this, for number 11. The first thing I did was, look, these two quantities are being divided. And whenever you have variable expressions that are being divided, you can subtract their powers. So negative 5 minus negative 9 is the fourth. It's a positive 4. So really, this reduces down to being w to the fourth. Then take this quantity right here, right? Like I always tell my classes, my students, make it rain. In other words, distribute it into this 4 right here. Multiply it. It's w squared. The principal would like to assemble a committee of 8 students from the 15-member student council. In this particular example, order does not matter because he's just selecting students. He's not selecting them for positions, just groups. And so therefore, you got to use a combination. And you know, just plug that guy into your calculator. Let's see. 13, an amateur bowler calculated his average for the season. If the data are normally distributed, about how many of his games, 50 games, were within one standard deviation of the mean? Well, this is the famous 68, 95, 99 rule. To be within one standard deviation of the mean, when all of the data is normally distributed, means that 68% of the data falls in that area. Okay, so just find 68% of 50 games. 68% of 50 is 34. What's the formula for the nth term? So here's what I did. I just wrote out the terms and I tried to figure out the pattern. I just added 2, add 2, add 2. So it's arithmetic, okay? So now from the formulas below, if I say, okay, well, the first term, you know, if this is a 1 for the first term, then this has also got to be a 1. And by plugging things in, we find out that the only choice that creates this sequence and gets me 10 for that spot is choice 1. What values of x are in the solution set of the following equation? I'm going to be honest, I just used my calculator. What do I mean by using my calculator? I literally typed in 3x minus 6, sorry about that, and x squared minus x minus 6. Hit the graph button, right? Boom, boom. I'm looking for that spot and that spot. So let's do second calc, intersect. Go near the point that you want. In this particular case, I want that guy right there, and hit enter 3 times. 1, 2, 3. So one of the answers is negative 6 for my y, okay? But they want the x values. Okay, so you see how you've gotten this? business over here. Sometimes your calculator will actually give you a message like this. This is e to the negative 15th. That means it is extremely, extremely, extremely small, and so basically you can consider that to be 0. Okay, but some people don't like this. This is too crazy. You're never supposed to round. Your calculator's supposed to give you perfect answers. So maybe instead of doing it this way through using the intersection tools in my calculator, I'm going to go look in my table of values to see if where things match up. Okay, well, take a look. When x is 4, both of the y's are 6. So 4 is one possible answer. Let's take a look also. When x is 0, both of the answers are negative 6. So in other words, 0 and 4 are possible answers for x, for which these two equations have the same values. The roots of this equation are, anytime you see this question, and it's just always almost repeated every time in each Regents in the multiple choice, use the discriminant. The discriminant is b squared minus 4ac. And so b squared, that's b, that's a, and that's c. So that's going to be 3 squared minus 4 times 9 times negative 4. It comes out to be 153. 153 is, when you try and take the square root of it, is an irrational number. And so therefore, the roots are irrational. And that's why I chose choice 4. In ABC, what's angle C? So I drew a picture of it, right? I have no idea what any of the angles are. So you use the law of cosines, and you just plug in, right? You know all the sides. You got to figure out cosine C. Plug it in, plug it in. I subtracted 34 over to this side. I divided by negative 30. I got that cos C is 15 over negative 30, and then I just inversed that in my calculator. What do I mean? I mean I did the following. If you have cosine and you're trying to figure out the angle, you do the inverse of the sides that they've given you, or that fraction that they've given you. Cos inverse of 15 divided by negative 30 is 120. So that's why I chose 120. When x to the negative 1 minus 1 is divided by x to the minus 1, the quotient is, so x to the negative 1 is 1 over x. And basically what you have to do is I'm going to try and simplify this down. So I'm going to multiply top and bottom by something that will clear the denominators. Well, this is the only one that has a denominator. So I'm multiplying by x over 1 on the top, and I'm multiplying by x over 1 on the bottom. And watch, this is a trick. It works like magic. X over 1 times 1 over x is 1, and x over 1 times 1 is x. X over 1 times x is x squared, and x over 1 times 1 is x. And check this out. You see this? You see this? Factor this guy over here. They both got to have an x in common. You have two binomials exactly reversed by subtraction. They always cancel out to be negative 1. I just put the negative 1 up over here. It doesn't matter which spot you put it in. And that's your final answer. This fraction is equivalent to, so here we go. You can't have a fraction, you can't have a radical in the denominator. So you multiply top and bottom by the bottom. Okay, so here we go. This is essentially squares the radical on the bottom and takes it away. Cancel the 3's, just left with a squared b on the bottom. Square root of a squared is just a, so this thing pops out in front, cancels with that. That's your final answer. Gonna have to zoom out a little bit. Which graph represents a one-to-one function? A one-to-one function passes both the vertical line test, making it a function, and the horizontal line test. And so this is the only one that passes both the vertical, in other words, it hits only one spot, and the horizontal. So it's one-to-one. The sides of a parallelogram measure 10 and 8. That's what I drew in. One angle of the parallelogram measures 46 degrees. What's the area of the parallelogram to the nearest square centimeter? So I'm telling you right now, it doesn't matter whether you put the 46 here or the 46 here and make this, 134. It will both be the same because we're going to use the sine formula for area. So a parallelogram can be cut into two congruent triangles by drawing in this diagonal down the middle. There's a formula on your reference sheet for area of a triangle. It's 1/2 AB sine C. But since there's two triangles in this parallelogram, two congruent ones, we can take off that little 1/2 part and just use the formula AB sine C. AB and the sine of the angle in between those two sides. It's approximately 129. What's the minimum point on this on the graph of the equation y equals fx? Oh, sorry, the minimum point on this graph is -1, -3. What's the minimum point if this graph gets shifted up by 5 units? Well, it's like you're just adding 5 to whatever the y coordinate was, and so -3 plus 5 is 2. Okay, here you've got this graph. What's the product of the roots of this equation? Well, the roots are where it hits the x-axis. So the x values, I'm sorry. And so the x values of these three coordinates right here are -1, 2, and 3, and you multiply them. That's the product. Well, what's the conjugate? The conjugate is just this exact same thing with the sign changed in between. So the conjugate is -2 minus 3i. What's the common ratio of this geometric? Geometric sequence means you have to multiply to get the next term. And so here's what I did. The first term is 27. The last term is 64. And I just drew a little picture for myself. I said, okay, so what do I have to multiply by 3 times to get to 64? And I tried these various choices. First, I multiplied 27 by, 3/4, and it didn't work. And then I multiplied by 27. I multiplied 27 by 64 over 81 3 times to see if I got 64, and it didn't work. And then I finally got choice 3, 4/3, and it worked. And so that's why I chose it. Which graph represents one complete cycle of this equation? Okay. So which graph represents one complete cycle? So if you notice, all these graphs look almost identical. And so what I tried to do was I tried to figure out the period of this function right here. How do you calculate period? Period is 2 pi over b. And b in this particular case is 3 pi. So if you plug that into the period formula, you get 2/3. Which means you will see one full cycle between 0 and 2/3. One full sine cycle, which is like an S shape like this. And so look, I'm like looking at these, and in 2 pi over 3, that doesn't fit. Pi over 3, that doesn't fit. And then 2/3, well, it's certainly not this one because I was supposed to see a whole sine graph between 0 and 2/3, and I'm only seeing half of it. So take a look at this graph right here, right? If I'm supposed to see the whole graph between 0 and 2/3, then I should see half of the sine graph between 0 and 1/3. And that's what's going on here. And so that's why I chose choice 3. This guy right here is crazy. Which two functions are inverse functions of each other? Well, sine and cosine are not inverse functions of each other. They're cofunctions. This guy right here, you could try and do it algebraically and see whether the two match. I'd rather just show you why choice 3 is correct. Okay, why is choice 3? Why are these two inverses of each other? Well, here you have this guy right here, y equals e to the x. You can always sub y in for f of x. And here you have what they claim might be its inverse. And here's what I did. Okay. ln x. The first thing I did was convert ln x back to its logarithmic form. It's log with a base of e. And then I converted the logarithmic form back into its exponential form. So these three things are all equivalent to each other. You're allowed to move back and forth between them as you want. Now, to find the inverse, you switch x and y. And check it out. By switching x and y, I got this guy. And so these two are inverses of each other. Short answers. Oh, factor completely. What do these guys all have in common? They have an a in common. You pull a out, you factor it out, you get this. Factor using the AC method. Take the first term, multiply it by the last term. You get negative 50x. Think of two numbers that might add together to be negative 23x, but multiply to be negative 50x. Sub these two numbers in for that. Then take these two terms right here, factor out the greatest common factor. Take these two terms right here and factor out their greatest common factor. And if nothing factors out, just factor out a 1. If you did it correctly, these two things should match exactly. And you take the stuff that you factored out, put it in one parenthesis, you take one of these items, you put it in the other parenthesis, and that's the AC method. Final answer, don't forget to bring this a down. Final answer is the following. A, 5x plus 1 and 2x minus 5. Express the sum using sigma notation. So I attempted to just write out these couple terms and try and figure out some pattern that's going on. And I found it. 14 is 7 plus 7. 21 is 7 plus 7 plus 7. And here you can see I've written it out. This is addition. This is using multiplication. And it's going 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way down to 15. And so sigma notation, you got to use the sigma symbol. This number down here is where you start at, and so I'm saying that you're starting at 1, and you got to go all the way to 15. N is going to represent these numbers, and they all multiply by 7. So that's this guy. That's it. That's sigma notation. Oh, this one's a tough one. Howard collects fish eggs from a pond behind his house so he could determine whether sunlight had an effect on how many eggs hatched. After he collected the eggs, he divided them into 2 tanks. He put both tanks outside near the pond, and he covered one of the tanks with a box to block out all sunlight. State whether Howard's investigation is an example of a controlled experiment, an observation, or a survey, and justify your response. So here's what I did. I'm giving you basically the definition of what these are in my own words. Look, a survey is a questionnaire or an interview only. A controlled experiment means the sample population is divided into 2 groups, one being a control and one being an experimental. The experimental groups are manipulated to try and isolate whatever it is you're trying to discover, while the control group remains the same, in the same state as if you would find it out in the wild. To give you some base marker as to how your manipulations changed the group. In an observation, the sample population is measured or surveyed as it is. You can't change things. You can't divide them up into groups. You can't have a control and experimental. Those are clear markers of a controlled experiment. Literally, control experimental, controlled experiment. Okay, so the researcher does not influence the population in any way or attempt to intervene in the study. You're basically just observing. And so after giving these, trying to figure out which one, after detailing out what it means to be a survey, what it means to be a controlled experiment, what it means to be an observation, I then wrote my little, justification for why it is that I think Howard's investigation is an example of a controlled experiment. I think it's a controlled experiment because he divides the population into 2 groups, one control and one experimental. By this, what do I mean? How do I know this? Well, he divides them into 2 tanks. He puts one outside near the pond, and he covers one of the tanks with a box to block out. He puts both tanks outside near the pond, not removing them too far away, and he covers one of the tanks with a box to block out sunlight. So Howard attempts to manipulate the experimental group by covering its tank with a box to block out all the sunlight. That's the experimental group. The control group tank is going to stay the same as if it were still in the pond. So that's why this guy is a controlled experiment. He messed with stuff. The table below shows the number of new stores in a coffee shop chain that opened during the years 1986 through 94. Using x equals 1 to represent the year, and so we got to put these, this is going to be 1, this is going to be 2, this is going to be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And y to represent the number of new stores. Write the exponential regression. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. This one requires your calculator. Grab your calculator. This is a statistics question. We got to enter all the data into a list. We're going to enter 1 for 1986 because that's what it says to do. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay. L2 is going to be 14, 27, 48, 80, 110, 153, 261, 403, 681. Okay. Then it says it wants you to do an exponential regression. So here we go. Sorry about that. You go to Stat, you go over to Calc, you go down to Exponential Regression, and you type in L1, comma, L2, and hit Enter. And here's the results you get. Now it says it wants you to round all these values to the nearest thousandth. So that's the 10th spot, that's the 100th, that's the 1000th. And so it's going to be 10.596, subbed in for A. And then it's going to be 1.586 subbed in for B. That's that. That's all you got to do. Easy, right? Oh, this guy's crazy. We're going to have to go scroll out a little bit. Okay. Solve the equation 2 tan c minus 3 equals 3 tan c minus 4 algebraically for all values of c in that interval. Okay, all right, here we go. So the first thing I want to do is whenever I typically solve trig equations, I like to do it with algebra. So I use a let statement. I say x equals tan c, and then all of a sudden this complicated equation transforms itself into a simple algebra problem. I solve it. I figure out how much each x is. In this case, I subtracted 2x from both sides, and I added 4 to both sides, and I got basically 1x equals 1. And since each x equals tan c, then that means tan c equals 1. The tan inverse of 1 equals c, and so c is 45. Now remember, okay, what was tan c equal to? Tan c was equal to 1. That's positive. Tangent is positive in quadrants 1 and 3. So one of the answers is 45. This angle becomes our reference angle, 45. And draw this same triangle down in quadrant 3 with the 45 there. Now, how many degrees do you need to go to get to all the way to the edge over here? You need to go 180 plus 45 more. It's 225. Circle shown in the diagram below has a center of negative 5, 3 and passes through the point negative 1, comma 7. Write the equation. So here's the equation of a circle, and this is the center right here, h and k. That's what h and k stand for. And you just sub these numbers in for h and k. Right? Like negative 5 is just 5. And now here you got to figure out how much r squared is. And there's a trick to this. Use Pythagorean Theorem. Look, here was this coordinate right here. They gave you a coordinate on the circle. Draw yourself in a little right triangle. Count the boxes. This is 4. This is 4. Use Pythagorean Theorem. Find r squared. You don't even need to take the square root because this equation wants r squared. And then you just sub in 32 and you're done. That's it. This, I am unsure of why this is worth 4 points. Okay, this is too easy. You just FOIL. 2/3 times 2/3, 4/9. 2/3 times negative 1, negative 2/3, x. 2/3, negative 1 times 2/3 x, that. And negative 1 times negative 1 is 1. And then you subtract, you subtract these two, it's negative 4/3. That's it. It's a piece of cake. Too easy. Find the total number of 12-letter arrangements that can be formed using the letters in the word Pennsylvania. Well, there's 12 letters, so there's 12 factorial ways that can be done. But then you have to divide out the repeats because it wants different 12-letter arrangements. So divide out the repeats. There are 3 n's, and the number of ways 3 n's can repeat is 3 factorial. And there's 2 a's, and the number of ways 2 a's can repeat is 2 factorial. And you punch this into your calculator. Let me show you how you got to punch it in order to get it, in order to have it come out okay. So that's 12 math. Scroll over to PRB, scroll down to this mark, divided by 3 math factorial, 2 math factorial. Now be careful. You see I put parentheses around this? This groups this whole quantity into the bottom. Hit enter. That's it. Who'd have thought there's so many ways this can be done? 39 million. It's crazy. Ah, this guy right here. We got a cheap shortcut for this one. We got a cheap shortcut. Okay? So here you go. These guys all have different denominators. So here's what you do. Put the whole thing in brackets. You are going to multiply everything through by the least common denominator. And if you factor this guy right here, you get x plus 3x minus 3. Distribute that in. Everything gets it. So take a look. It's distributed into this quantity over here. Okay? The plus 3's canceled. There goes that fraction. It gets distributed into this quantity right here. And the x minus 3 and the 3 minus x reduce because these two binomials are exactly reversed by subtraction and therefore cancel out to be -1. That's just one of those patterns or things you remember. It helps out a lot. And over here, I mean, these two things both cancel everything down here, and you're just left with 4. Now, where did I get this plus sign from? Because this -1 and this subtraction sign create a positive. It's like a negative is a positive. That's where that takes place. That's where it comes from. X minus 3 plus, 2x plus 6, because I distributed the 2 inside, equals 4. And from there on out, it's a piece of cake. You just add them together, subtract 3 over to this side, divide by 3, you get a third. Okay. Let's go a little smaller. Okay. Maybe a little bit bigger. Here we go. So 37. If tan A is 2/3 and sine B is 5 over the square root of 41 and angles A and B are in quadrant 1, find the value of tan A plus B. So here's the deal. This is this is something you find on your reference sheet. If you look it up on your reference sheet, tan A plus B is equal to tan A plus tan B divided by 1 minus the tan A tan B. It tells you how much tan A is, right? So there we go. We got this one. We got this one. We need to just know tan B. How do you find that? Well, it tells you both of the angles are in quadrant 1. And it tells you the sine of B is 5 over the square root of 41. So this is the opposite side of this triangle. And this is the hypotenuse of this triangle. And you draw in the triangle, use Pythagorean Theorem, find out how much x is. X is going to be 4. And that means that the tangent of this angle, angle B, is going to be equal to 5 over x, or 5 over 4. And now that you know both tan A and tan B, you just sub them into the formula. That's what I did. I subbed them in. I used my calculator to add these and my calculator to add these, or subtract this and multiply it, whatever operations were going on. And then I took this and I divided it by this, and I got 11.5. A study shows that 35% of the fish caught in a local lake had high levels of mercury. Suppose that 10 fish were caught from this lake. Find to the nearest 0.1% the probability that at least 8 of the 10 fish caught did not contain high levels of mercury. Okay, so this is like a double, this is like a real tricky wording in the question. First of all, 10 fish are going to get caught. That's our N. Our R, it says at least 8. At least means 8 could have been caught, 9 could have been caught, 10 could be caught. That's 8, 9, and 10. That's our R. P, where did I get this 0.65? We are actually looking to catch fish which do not contain high levels of mercury. And since the probability of catching one of them that contains high levels of mercury is 0.35 or 35%, not getting high mercury levels must be 0.65. And then we just use our formula. We need to find the probability of exactly 8, exactly 9, and exactly 10. That's NCR, P to the R, Q to the N minus R. Punch these guys into your calculator, you write down their numbers, and then you have to add these three probabilities because we want the probability of 8, we want the probability of 9 fish, we want the probability of 10 fish being caught. And the sum is this long number. It wants to the nearest tenth of a percent, so that's 26.2 because this 6 rounds that up to a 2. That's 26.2, that's the nearest tenth of a percent. Finally, last problem of this test. Okay, we got a logarithm problem. This thing over here is the base, this is the exponent, and this quantity is the result. So x plus 3 squared is this result. X plus 3 squared is x squared plus 6x plus 9, and it equals this. You put this over 1, you cross multiply. Okay. You get this. Subtract all this quantity over to the other side. So basically I'm trying to set it equal to 0. Look what I get. I get 6x squared because these x cubes cancel out. I subtract x, so that's going to give me the 8x. And I got a plus 2. Then what I do is, everything has 2 in common, so I divide the whole thing out by 2. It makes it just easier to deal with. I factor this. Right? There's only one way to create. There's lots of different ways you could attempt to factor this. You could use the AC method. You could use lots of stuff. But I just said to myself, you know what? There's only one way to get 3x squared. That's 3x and x. There's only one way to get a positive 1 and a positive 4x. That's with 1 and 1. And so I just tried it out and kind of did the guess and check method. Set these two quantities equal to 0. Solve. And there's my final answer. And that's it for August 2010, the Algebra 2 Trigonometry Regents.